I'm gonna talk about books. Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. This is Alyssa. You're here at Portraits and Pages. I'm gonna do like a quick little recap of my 2020 stats and then tell you about my goals for 2021. I'm also gonna be releasing a video that has my 2021 art goals because I actually just got this gift today of a planner for 2021, like reflections and goals, and I set my reading ones down and I need to transfer them to this notebook, and then I'm going to be thinking about my art ones and my general goals. So I will do that and then let y'all know about that. So just as a recap, for 2020 I read 104 books and I attempted about 109, 108, but you know, it didn't get that far. And so I'm not going to go through a whole like thing where I analyze the spreadsheet. I've done that several times and I just wanted to keep the video a little shorter. So here are the general notes that I have. My goals for 2020 were to read Lord of the Rings complete, the main book that has split up into 3 books, read a Jane Austen novel, read more nonfiction and comics, read a short story or 2, and complete the Women's Reading Challenge on Storygraph, which I joined about halfway through the year. So it was like, if I didn't make it, it was fine, but I did make it, so I'm excited about that. So here are some general statistics about how I read this year. This year, out of all the books I read, about 77% of those were from an American author, and some of them were like from the perspective of immigrants, but the core topic of the book was about Americanness, so I consider them American, so I counted them for that. Also, if it was a graphic novel series, even if the like illustrator was Canadian and the author was American or they're from another country, I'm just thinking of that because it was a series I read where that was the case. I considered that an American book because the writer is American and they drive the story. So about 50% of the works that I read this year were by white authors. This is down by a lot, which I'm happy about, because before, I think in 2019, it was 71% white. So I want to be reading more diversely, and I did that. I still don't want any group to be above 40%, so that's kind of a bummer. But you know, I got it down, and so also I got the diversity of like what countries and where from the world they are down, because last year in 2019 I was 81%. I went from 84% and then down to 2020 I went down to 77%, and I went from over 70% white to 50. 43% of the authors I read this year were Black. That's exciting. This is the most I've ever read from Black and African American writers. This is from all over the world, but mostly American, as you could tell probably from the other stat. So that was great. About 8% of the books I read were from Latinx authors, and then 8% Indigenous and Asian. I don't want to put those together, but I read so few, I'm kind of ashamed, so I'm putting them together. Indigenous, it would probably be like 1% because I only read 2 novels from Indigenous writers and 6 Asian writers. None were South Asian, which is not really reading diversity if I'm only reading like the East Asian, Japan, Chinese, South Korea. So that's my statistics as far as race goes, for race and ethnicity, because Latinx is not a race, for 2020. And so for 2021, we'll get into my goals in a second. I read 7 short stories, so I definitely hit above 2 novellas and 4 essay books, so those were short books. Chimamanda Adichie, I read 2 of her books, and then some other stuff. My top genres for 2020, okay, so the way I did my top genres was I wrote the genre down as the primary genre and then the secondary genre, because I really don't like YA being considered a genre, because it's not a genre, it's just a marketing word. So I would consider a secondary genre YA, but not a primary genre. And then other ones was because, like, if it was historical fiction that's heavy on race, I would consider it historical fiction number 1 and race second, because that is like within a subgenre, because race can be within any genre, but historical fiction necessarily can't, if that makes sense. So my top genres were fantasy, 22 books and graphic novels, contemporary, 11 books and graphic novels. I'm just gonna say books, but no, when I say books, I'm talking about graphic novels as well. 10 memoirs. Now, only 1 hit my favorite list. I could have made a list of top 10 biographies and memoirs that I read in 2020, but I was like, that's too much. I liked all of them. I think all except for 2, and 1 made my least favorite list. But I read 10 memoirs, That's my third most read genre, main genre. 10 superhero, no surprise, I read a lot of graphic novels. And my secondary genres, 20 were YA books, 10 secondary genre was science fiction, 9 secondary genre was race, 9 secondary genre was adventure, 8 secondary genres I classified as humor, so I read a lot of funny books, you know. Honestly, I probably read, the ones that I read this year were more than I've read for the entirety of my life. Discounting like really early elementary comedy, like your Junie B. Jones and your other books to get people to read. But like, you know, junior high up, this is the most comedy I've ever read, and I really enjoyed that lightness to the year. So when I count for my primary and secondary genre, I also did like, let me see what my top things that I'm gravitating towards, and it was no surprise, my number one was fantasy with 25 books. Every time, again, I say books, I also mean graphic novels. 21 science fiction, and you know, it's called sci-fi fantasy as a genre, so that's together 46 books that had that as a primary or secondary tag. 40 out of 100 and something, so I really like those two genres. The third most was contemporary, which is really surprising because I really don't read a lot of contemporary. My fourth most read genre was a tie between LGBT books and history books, and some were obviously LGBT history, like the book about Charlotte Cushman. That was one of my favorite nonfiction books for 2020, so there's no surprise that both history and LGBT were both high up as far as the genres that I read, because I did make an effort to read more LGBT fiction and nonfiction. So of these books, a few other statistics that weren't necessarily as part of goals, but just notes. I read 7-ish books from before I was born, and 2 were for a class. So I was born in 1994. The 7 books that I read and 5 that I chose were written before 1994. 6 books were from the 2000s, 80 books were from the 2010s, and 13 books were 2020 reads. So I read 13 books that came out that year. And that's actually one of my goals this year, is to read at least 12 books that come out this year, because even though it's good to always support authors from marginalized and underrepresented communities, you also want to do it while they're alive and while it matters more, because then they will have more faith put in that and get more book deals. So reading contemporary, reading diversely. And one more thing, I owned 15 of the books I read. Granted, a few of those I bought after, most of those I bought after I read them. I really enjoyed them, so I added them to my collection. And then 79 of them ish were fiction and 23% nonfiction. So over 2/3 was fiction. No surprise, but I am glad that I pushed myself with nonfiction. And honestly, you know, I made them separate lists, but some of them of the nonfiction I like better than the fiction, so I just couldn't narrow that down to 10, so I made 2 separate lists. So for my goals for 2020, I read all the Lord of the Rings. I actually started the Fellowship of the Ring in 2019, so I read The Two Towers and Return of the King in January and February, I believe. Did that. I did not read Jane Austen. I kept putting it off. Oops. Even though I own one, and I love Pride and Prejudice, the movie. It's one of my favorite movies. I read more nonfiction and comics. I did good on that. I read multiple short stories, and I completed the Women's Challenge, which I'm going to put a link for that down below if I can find it again. Could not find it when I was looking for it the other day. So what are my reading goals for 2021? So I kind of gave a quick recap of my general analysis notes, looking at how I categorize my reading, and I looked at what I want to do better, what I did really good on, what do I want to hold on to, and I looked at how I'm going to set my overall goals for 2021. My reading goal for 2020, I believe, was 60 books, and I hit 60 during the summer because we're in a pandemic and I'm home much more, so I adjusted it a little bit more during the summer because I was able to hit 60 books midsummer. If my face is getting all flustered, I'm editing it out, but I am sneezing so much. Added like 20 more, and I had 20 more until I hit 100, and then when I was like in the late 80s, and then I knew I was going to get to 100 before the end of the year, I didn't want to push it again because I also don't want to push it to where I can't make it anymore. I'm just like, 100 is like a feat. Like most people, their yearly goals are like 12, 24, 50. I did 100, and I should just be proud of what I did and stop trying to push myself that much. Just relax. I know I was going to hit over 100, and I did, and I'm happy about that, but that is not going to be my goal for 2021. So I've broken my goals down for 2021 into 4 categories. Monthly goals, yearly goals, or the year goal, specific books to read, and flexible goals like read more blank. I'm going to go down in that order as I read them. So, my monthly goals. I want to read 2 books per month from my personal collection that I haven't read or haven't read in 10 plus years. A lot of the books I own, and I shouldn't say a lot, a hefty sum, maybe those are synonyms, phrases, I have not read, or I have not read in such a long time, and I don't know if I want to keep them. Some of them are my favorite books, and I'm like, I'm reading them with more knowledge, and as an adult, and maybe they're problematic, maybe it's nostalgia and they're not really good. So I want to look at those. I also buy way too many books, and one person watching knows this. So I want to go through them because I want to purchase more books. And while I could just buy more shelves, I also want to be mindful and like maybe somebody else would enjoy this book so I can donate it. There'll be a handful of ones that I don't like, but I like really, really like the cover or it has a special meaning. And so I'm not going to give them away, but I do want to eat away at my collection and make sure that like I'm not just buying, and that I'm buying things that I actually really enjoy and want to keep. Okay, so that's a goal, is to read 2 books for my personal collection, which isn't all of them. Okay, I got like 2 stacks in another shelf that you can't see right there. Actually, you can kind of see it. So that's a goal. I also want to read 1 nonfiction book a month, and I don't want a majority of my nonfiction this year to be memoirs. I think it was like over 50% of the nonfiction I read, or like just an incredibly high amount, were memoirs. And if I do read more memoirs, which I'm down to, like I put that in one of my most, I don't know if it's a memoir, biography, or autobiography, but in one of my most anticipated books of 2021 was a memoir by Cecilia Tyson. But I don't want a majority of my nonfiction to be first person. I feel like even though I love reading those, they're really easy, and so I want to challenge myself more. And I already have more than a few in my personal collection that I want to get through. That's another thing. Some of these goals can like be completed together. So I could read 2 books a month for my collection that are nonfiction, and that hits both of those. So I'm really flexible with my goals. The next one from my monthly goals, or my final one for my monthly goals, is to read 1 book a month from a non-American. As I said with my other statistics, I have read majority American perspective. I want more perspective from people who live different lives than me, and like even though I could read somebody from a different race, a different state, a different religion, I feel like getting more non-American perspective would be useful. And so 1 book a month that is non-American, from a non-American perspective. I prefer it to be fiction, but non-fiction would work too. And if I own it and it's non-fiction and it's non-American, that's 3. There we go. So 1 book a month non-American, 1 non-fiction book a month, preferably not a memoir. I don't want more than 50% this next year. And 2 books for my personal collection. Those are my monthly goals. Now for my yearly goals, I want white authors cannot make more than 33% of my reading. Comics with over 50% white creators count. So a lot of comics I read this year were pretty diverse by like the standards of what you would think. For example, Descenders was a white American and a, I believe, Vietnamese American person. Sex Criminals, 2 white men. The Spider-Gwen comic series was had people Latinx, white, I believe Asian. So they were kind of diverse, but it was like a hit and miss. So I do want, like, if they're majority white of the staff, which I consider like the top 2 or 4 people, unless it's an anthology, then that's different. I want, if more than half of those comic creators of that narrative are white, then I will count that as a white book. Okay, so I want to read 6 or more books by women that were published before I was born. I do read a lot of books by women, however, I don't read a lot from the perspective of people who were alive and around before I was born. So that's one of my goals. I want to read 72 books, which is an average of 6 books a month. And again, graphic novels count. I also want to read 6 books from the Zora Canon. So the Zora Canon is the 100 most influential and important books by Black women. I think specifically Black American women. And it's named after famous anthropologist, writer, playwright, Zora Neale Hurston. And I've read a few books from there. Like, I've been when I found the list, I think they published it in 2019. I'd read 1 or 2 books, and I actively read, I believe, 3 books this last year from this list. And I will be linking that down below. But I do want to read 6+ books from the Zora Canon. And again, that would qualify for some of these other categories, like a nonfiction book, or a book from my personal collection. I think I have 1 or 2. So, and I don't mean like, oh, just the author from the collection. They have very specific works categorized by year and moment in time and the national mood and thoughts going through Black women's minds. And it starts from I think right before the end of slavery, so 1860s, to the teens when it was published. The list was published in 2019. And the Zora canon is by the Zora magazine, which is a magazine published on the Medium website. And those are my year goals. So we have my monthly, my year, and my final list is going to be specific books I want to read. I'm finally going to read Pride and Prejudice. This year, 2021, is my year, okay? I'm going to read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, Kindred by Octavia Butler, All About Love by Bell Hooks, Mankiller, A Chief and Her People by Wilma Mankiller, and things like All About Love and Kindred are also on the Zora canon list. So you see how I'm double dipping here? They're also books written, I believe, both before I was born. I don't know about All About Love, if that was written before I was born, but Kindred was. I'm 90% positive. Okay, and so my last 3 goals are more flexible goals. I don't have a number set because even though I want to read more diversity as far as gender, race, life experience, I also want to make sure I have some that are a little loose, that I'm not meeting quotas. Like, so when I read 6 books by Black women from before I was born, I'm not like, pack it up, we did it. I will continue to read diversely. However, I just want to make sure I am meeting a certain amount and then continuing from there, okay? This is just what I'm doing. So, my flexible goals that are kind of blank is read more books by Asian and Indigenous writers. I only read 2 Indigenous and 6 Asian writers, and I think I included American Like Me, which is a memoir that has both. So if you take that off, I read 1 Indigenous and just a handful of Asian writers. So that's a goal of mine, to read more of those 2 specific racial groups. I also want to read a romance book or 3, but I want them to be adult romances, not YAs. When I say romance, like, I know there's romance in things like, I'm reading the Daevabad trilogy, so I just read City of Brass, and now I'm on Kingdom of Copper. Those do have a romance, but they're more historical fiction, fantasy, so I wouldn't count that as a romance book. When I'm talking about romance, I'm talking about, like, Alyssa Cole's books, minus, the one that I read. That's, like, her only non-romance, but things like To Catch a Queen, and all these other, Take a Hint, Tanny Brown, like, these are very popular romance books on BookTube and in general, and I want to make sure, I want to try and look into that genre. It's a very stigmatized genre, and some of it has to do with misogyny, some of it has to do with, actually a lot of it has to do with misogyny, and I feel like I have kind of fallen into that group of like, oh, I'm not like them, I read this, I don't read that. And writing is writing, and storytelling is storytelling, and so I want to read more romance. I also am not going to include Outlander. I love that show. There, you can see the books are right there, but that's historical fiction, sci-fi romance, and you see, so I'm not doing that. I'm doing straight romance, contemporary. Maybe I can count if I read Bridgerton, that new Netflix show. I want to read the first book before I watch the first season. I can count that, even though it's like historical. It's the main thing is romance. And with Outlander, it's just so much more, so. But I am going to make an effort to read more contemporary romance. So last 20 or so years, I did read If Beale Street Could Talk and the American Marriage Story, but I want to push that. I want to see what else I can read. And those are both very acclaimed by non-romance readers, and so I want to read something that romance readers would push, that somebody might turn up their nose to and see what all that's about. And my last loose goal is to read another 2 or 3 books from the Re-Envisioning American History series. I read A Black and Latinx History of the United States, loved it. I read A Queer History of the United States, loved it. Both of them are in my top 10 nonfiction books of 2020, and really are like among the best nonfiction books I've ever read. Like, if I did a life list, they would probably both make it. And I want to read 2 more from the series. They have a history of the United States centered around Black women, disability, Indigenous peoples. I think they just have 3 right now, so I want to read at least 2 more of those, and if possible, like, read all of them. And if they publish another one this year, I might probably buy that and make that one of them. But it's such a good series, so I want to do that. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click on the like button and also subscribe. You can push the notification bell and you will get notified when I upload a new video. The next video will probably be an art video because I'm just done reading and done art, which is a reflection of 2020 and then my goals. I might not be on camera for that one. It might just be a bunch of speed drawings. As you can see from the end of my videos, I post a little artwork that I recently worked on or finished, and I haven't really done anything beyond that with art in addition to the channel update. But a lot of people have found me since I've changed and kind of refocused my content away from gaming. So yeah, and I will be writing those all in this great plan. I just can't. I love this so much. I just got it today. Oh, it has a back. By this great planner, writing down my art goals, but I just have to think about it and then make the video. Thank you for watching. I will see you when I see you.